Hey Ben, how's it going? I'm just looking now. I gotta get this other button done up.
Yeah,
Don't
get
look
that.
like my
Yeah,
formal self.
the people of YouTube, they
Yeah,
you're showing a little skin for them today.
yeah, I gotta get that collar.
No,
Alrighty.
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good, good. Yeah, um, you know, I maybe we'll do a quick recap on how I did in fantasy football this year. So I won two of four leagues. The two leagues that I won in, were smaller leagues. So one of them was our internal rolling insights league, and then one of them was just a bunch of buddies. I think there's only six or seven of us in that particular one at the moment. Actually, there wouldn't be seven because that would be lopsided. Um, but then I finished third in one of my competitive pools, and then we finished fifth in FSGA, and I felt like we had a really good team in FSGA this year. Like got a little bit uh, rocked by the Bengals. Burrow, one of the teams had Chase and Burrows, and I think Chase Brown, like all three in 1 week. Um, which then they went off and that was the end. But obviously this is a Rolling Insights SportWise data feeds podcast. But I do really want to stress that like there's no way that I would be able to be competitive in four leagues with how busy I am at work, plus four hockey leagues without using SportWise and having a kind of a data space built for each of them. Three of them were on Yahoo, so it was easy because it's integrated with Yahoo. You just refresh it, pulls in all the players, and then you can kind of make your decisions based on that. If you need waiver wire pickups, trades, just even evaluate sit start. But then the other one is the FSGA one is an RT Sports. So you have to kind of use a combination of the two of comparing what is on RT Sports versus. But we do have a feature coming that'll allow you to like export from RT Sports, create a custom data set, and then create a data space with that. So you'll be able to just export, upload, and then everything will be refreshed. So I'm looking forward to next year, but it was a pretty good season this year in football. Like, you know, two first, third, and a fifth is not too bad.
Yeah, that's very good. I played in five money leagues this year, like actual like money leagues. I won money in all of them. Did not win any league though. I somehow in all five of my leagues faced Jonathan Taylor in the semifinals, like in the round, the,
Yeah.
the game where he had three touchdowns. Yeah, I don't know. Somehow in all five leagues I faced him. I don't know how that's possible, but
Yeah. What's the
yeah,
probability?
ended up making money, so that was good. I did really well. Like so every year, I don't know like if you're familiar with this because we've just met, but like I write this huge article every year that kind of highlights round by round who I would take in my drafts, and then I kind of put together a list of like five or six guys that like I'm really like planting my flag, like I would want these guys on my team this year. And I did very good with that this year. So I'm super excited to like be able to like bring that to obviously Rolling Insights now for this upcoming football season, and then in being able to incorporate the data and like build draft kits and all that stuff. Like I'm really excited for that for 2025.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's funny because I saw on Yahoo's already advertising like do your mock drafts. They're already starting best ball for 2025. Like it starts again. It just ended. No time,
It's year
no
round
rest for
now.
the wicked.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, why don't we do we want to start in NFL and then finish NHL?
Yeah, that
Because
works.
we're already talking about it. Okay, let's pull up the power rankings. I know you showed on the
Hmm.
daily one as well, but I find it interesting going into playoffs. Then we'll look at the playoff match itself. So just need to refresh it, pull in the latest data. Um, so how do you feel that it in the end kind of all shook out and who's in the rankings and who dropped and who rose and I think it's pretty reflective of how the teams ultimately end up placing.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good list. I would move Kansas City higher to, probably after Detroit. But overall, I think the list is pretty good. So I did those like weekly videos, like I was doing them like every Wednesday for the last like 4 or 5 weeks, where I would, do here's the updated power rankings and then give my thoughts on it. And
Yeah.
for like 4 weeks in a row, the Eagles they were down like where the Ravens and the Broncos were, and then they moved up a little bit to like where the Steelers were, and I was like, the Eagles need to be higher on this list because for the last 2 months since I started doing the daily streams here in November, I was saying, I really think the Eagles are that's my pick to go to the Super Bowl. I don't know if they'll win, but I think they're gonna get there. So now that like we've finally got to the playoffs, the data is coinciding with what I've thought
Yes.
all along. So I personally love seeing that. I think the Eagles, like, I'm not giving betting advice specifically on this video, but I will personally myself be betting on the Eagles to win the NFC because I mean the Lions are the favorite. I think the Eagles are better than the Lions. The data also now thinks the Eagles are better than the Lions, so it kind of just matches up perfectly for me.
Well, and one of the things that I find interesting is if you sort by this one, so this is points against defense. Number one, the Eagles. And, defense
Hmm.
wins championships. But if you also look at points scored per game, they're not far off.
Yeah.
The Detroit Lions are at the top,
Yep.
but and their defense has been banged up, and there's reasons for them to kind of decline, towards the end of the season, and we'll see how that factors into the playoffs. And they aren't far off, but you just look at the difference between like how good their defense is compared to their offense, and how their defense has kind of struggled lately and allowed a lot of points. It makes sense. It makes sense that they've jumped up and hopped over the Lions.
Yeah, and I think, you highlighted it. Like the Lions are so injured on defense, and yeah, they're getting David Montgomery back. It sounds like because they're going to have this week off. They may get a couple guys back on defense, but overall, the team is missing some key players. The Eagles somehow, I don't know how it's possible in today's NFL to navigate this. The Eagles have all 22 starting players healthy for this playoffs.
I know it's crazy. It's and hey, we'll see. Like one other thing I wanted to ask you about is the week off. How do you think that's going to affect? Because I have a belief that teams that take a week off, so they get the bye, they get the week off, that they struggle to come into a competitive environment that week when they first come back. If they can survive it, then it benefits them because they stay healthier, one less game, all those different reasons. But a lot of them really, in my opinion, I haven't looked at a lot of data, this is anecdotal and just observational, struggle in that first game back.
Yeah, I don't have the data for that specifically like pulled up off the top of my head. I would say, I would say it's probably pretty average for a team that has that week off to struggle early on in a game. I think that Kansas City, for whatever reason, their coaching staff or whatever it is, because if you think about Andy Reid, kind of what he's known for in his career, other than being, a Hall of Fame great coach, he's been very, very good off bye weeks in his career when you give him an extra week to prepare for a team. Like it's a very set trend of how good he's been off a bye week. So they've kind of been the one team that's been able to survive that week off, and it's honestly probably helped them. But other teams that don't have quite as good coaching staffs, I don't know. Like, I don't think the Lions haven't had a bye week, so we don't know. Some teams that Kansas City gets it all the time, so we haven't seen any of these other AFC teams really. But yeah, I don't think it's out of the realm to think that a team would struggle at least early on in a game coming off that bye week for sure.
Yeah, and I agree. That's the coaching factor that you always mentioned. Even though Dan Campbell's a great coach. But Andy Reid, he
Yeah,
is a
it's
bit
it's
of
another
a,
level.
yeah, trump card, ace card in the sleeve. So one of the other things that I wanted to quickly point out is just turnover rates. Because I'm also a strong believer, and this is something that I built into kind of my weekly model for comparing matchups. I believe that turnovers particularly in the playoffs, make or break the games. And again, maybe it's that big moment that I remember, and so I look at it. I'm like the Bills and the Chargers, least number of turnovers this year. How do you handicap that in terms of the other things that we just mentioned in terms of points scored against defense and offense and coaches, um, and full disclosure, I picked the Chargers, placed a bet on them to win this week.
Yeah, I definitely think the turnovers, it makes a huge difference. At some points it can be kind of fluky, like if you think about it, like a turnover can be fluky depending on what it is. Like the way a ball bounces, right, can dictate so much. And it's so crazy that these guys, they play they play this long season, they put their bodies on the line, and then, literally a ball bouncing one way or the other can dictate, if they win. But yeah, I completely agree. I like the Chargers definitely over the Texans this week. I think coaching staff is a huge. My breakdown for that is out on the website, they're rollinginsights.com. So I'll have a breakdown for every game. But yeah, I think the Chargers have a huge edge coaching staff over the Texans. They don't turn the ball over as much, like you said. They've looked significant. Like I think defensively, both teams are good. Offensively, I would put the Chargers on another level compared to Houston for me. Uh, at least for how they're coming in to the game, you know.
Yeah, if you look at our power ranks, it's like one of the most dramatic differences
Yeah, I thought
in
that
all
was
the
interesting too.
matchups.
Chargers were fourth overall. Texans were like down at like 15 or 16 overall.
Yeah, they're middle of the pack, and like some of it too. Again, talking about injuries, et cetera. They've had a bit of a rough go, but they did not play well at the end of the season. Like they just dropped. They struggled to start, then they played well, and then they definitely did not finish strong. So I'm definitely we'll look at the matchups specifically, but if you just look at the data, um, they're pretty much. Except for defensive turnovers, like they cause more defensive turnovers, points against worse. They have less yards, less yards per play. They have the ball more, which I thought was a little bit interesting, but they score less points. And it's only one difference in terms of win. But uh,
The
looking at
power
each of
ranking
the
number is just so drastic, though.
yeah, exactly. And that's probably a good transition. So why don't we quickly look at, it's the survivor pool. But it's also dual purpose in that you can look at each of the different matchups for the week. And so, based on this model, which has a few less data points than the power ranking, here's our kind of ranked matchups based on home team advantage over the away team. And just for those at home, just to remember, like a high norm home away rank means that the home team is picked to win, and the lowest means that the away team is picked to win. And there is some skewing here. It's not perfectly normalized at zero, but you get an idea of who's going to win or lose, and you can kind of use this to kind of compare the statistics for this particular model. So, a couple of that I wanted to bring up for you is I was kind of surprised using this model that the Eagles were only slightly considered favorites over the Packers. Where I think this is a lopsided, just the eyeball test tells me that the Eagles are going to crush it.
Yeah, I agree. Eyeball test, I like the Eagles. I thought it would be closer to 6 points. I guess the spread it's like 4.5. I guess even in the power rankings, the data that I've had that we've put in there, I mean, it's loved the Packers all season. So why the eyeball test doesn't look great for them, how they've kind of come into the playoffs in the last few weeks. The data has had them ranked pretty high for the
Yeah.
majority of the season.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The other one, that I'm curious is Commanders over the Bucks. Um, it's closer than I thought because I've liked the Commanders all year. I know that they won a bunch of fluky games, last play heroics. But I've loved the Commanders this year, and maybe it's just stylistically, I've bought into the hype of Jaden Daniels, and I just like watching their games. But I didn't think it would be this close. I thought that they would have a greater advantage over the Bucks, even though the Bucks are the home team.
Yeah, so I'm glad you kind of brought that up. So there's a big, and obviously the data can't account for this trend, right? Because this isn't a season long kind of stat. But I think it was I think maybe there's a Twitter account at Cleve TA. He kind of has talked about this for a few years, but there's a huge trend in the NFL, and it's you can go back like 20 years. Quarterbacks making their first playoff start versus quarterbacks not making their first playoff start. It's around the player making their first start. They're against the spread record. It's like in the 30% range. Like first time quarterbacks versus experience, it's night and day. Like there's not a huge track record of success,
Mm,
especially if you isolate that to on the road. It gets even worse. Like huge differentials in those trends. And there's three instances of that. This Jaden Daniels on the road against Baker Mayfield. So Jaden Daniels making his first playoff start versus Baker, who has been in the playoffs before. Sam Darnold making his first playoff start on the road against Matt Stafford, who has been in the playoffs. And then Bo Nix on the road at Buffalo, making his first playoff start against Josh Allen. So I think that's interesting too, like looking at these numbers and then kind of baking that as well. You could maybe find an edge there. Like, I don't know, maybe Tampa has a little bit bigger of an edge than what this is accounting for, I don't know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I didn't actually thinking about this prepping for the conversation. I didn't really consider Sam Darnold one of those rookie quarterbacks. But you're right. Like he hasn't played in a playoff game and hasn't played in a lot of big moments. And even, last week, I don't think he played great. He
No,
seemed too
yeah,
hyped
he
up,
he
overthrew
just
the
played
ball a
he
bunch. And
just played terrible in a big game too.
yeah. So you're thinking there might be an upset there? You think the Rams might?
Yeah, I like the Rams in that game, I think, for sure.
Interesting, interesting. I picked the Vikings, but just purely straight on the data and their season performance. I didn't take that into consideration. Like I said, sometimes I'm a little bit nervous placing those bets because you watch the last game, small sample size, but the Vikings did not play great.
Yeah, it was just a weird game. Like I didn't understand their game plan. Like they have a very good coaching staff, like offensive scheme, and it was just weird. Like they didn't really seem to make any adjustments in the game. Like I thought, going into halftime, it was very evident Sam Darnold was under pressure a ton, couldn't get the ball out downfield. Like they needed to do something to counteract that, and they just never changed. I don't know. And then they literally did nothing in the second half. Very weird.
Well, so it's funny because the one league that I won season long, the player that was remaining playing was Justin Jefferson. And I thought for sure,
Oh yeah, I
I'm
was gonna
not,
ask you about that league. Did you win that week
I
18?
won. I won. And the
All
thing is
right,
that
good.
Jefferson had 7 points like right away. I was like, okay, well, I've lost. There's no way. And I had a 9 point lead. Um, and then they took him out. So I think a little bit, I don't know if this was documents I haven't researched. I didn't see anything on Twitter talking about this, but I kind of feel like the Vikings gave up. Like they're like, we don't want to show anything. We're just gonna
Yeah.
rest guys. We're not gonna win this game. It was a big game though. Like they should like my view in sports is you need to compete every single time because you can't turn it on, turn it off.
hmm No, I agree. It was just weird all around. And then I saw so they activated Daniel Jones to the active roster. He's not gonna start the game or anything over Sam Darnold, but I would not be surprised, especially because they have an extra day because they don't play till Monday night. I would not be surprised if they have some package for Daniel Jones, whether it's they need a first down, they bring him in, or in the red zone. if they're on like the 5 yard line, they bring him in and he runs or something. Like I could definitely see that happening.
Hey, you know my thoughts on that. I'm all about using two quarterbacks in
Yeah.
specialized situations.
I know. I was hoping that we get Daniel Jones. Like, I don't think they'll post touchdown odds, but if they do, I would be interested in it, I think.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one. Cool. Anything else? NFL heading into the playoffs?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. There's so many like I was gonna be like, I don't know, can you go back to the power rankings thing real quick? And I
Yeah.
just want to see if you do it reverse, like let's look at the worst teams and see which ones fired their coach. Like the Browns did not, the Titans did not, the Raiders did, Giants did not, Patriots did, Jaguars did, Panthers did not, Jets did. Wow, the Cowboys are so I can't believe the Cowboys are so far down there. And the
Yeah,
49ers, I mean, that's insane. But they had so many injuries.
a lot of
I'll
injuries. Yeah.
give them a pass, I guess. But yeah,
Well,
I don't know.
I
Interesting.
mean, you know what? The only thing about the 49ers is like so much of it was dependent on CMC playing well, and he had a history of injuries. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
well, you kind of got what you paid for. And I know you didn't expect all these other guys to get injured, but you're running your offense through CMC. He's not available, puts all these other positions in kind of tough spots. You get more injuries, it just compounds. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I was disappointed. I was hopeful that that trade is going to work out. But in the I think it kind of ended up being what it was, like a very short-term solution, and we'll see what he's like next year.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest storyline from fantasy football this year is the lack of reporting on how significant Christian McCaffrey's injury was. And so I'm someone like I didn't take McCaffrey in any of my leagues. I don't like to take injured players. Like every year there's a handful of guys that get injured in training camp and it's unfortunate, but I really don't want to draft them. That being said though, I'm always concerned when these guys have consistent calf injuries because it just leads too often to the Achilles. And I mean, I feel like the lack of reporting, like that's bad on the 49ers part. Like with how much people spend money on stuff, like you really need to have concise, accurate reporting nowadays. You know, the NFL's gone all in on fantasy football, sports betting. They're partnered with these things now. Like you really can't have this kind of like lack of information, I guess, available. But I feel like people were underrating. Like he didn't practice late last season, like the last few weeks in the playoffs. I don't think he practiced one time. Like his calf injury was so bad, he was literally just getting to the point to where he could play in games. So it's not shocking that that carried over into this
Mhm.
season, but I mean, it kind of feels like they went all in to win that title. Like I'm gonna go all in. I'm gonna hurt myself, and they went all in to win the Super Bowl, and it didn't happen. But I don't know, man. It's like it's tough for me to trust if he's gonna be healthy even this next season.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny, the one league that ends on week 18, I drafted him first overall. It's funny when I was in the chair, I was like, man, I know that, and like obviously who we pick in our fantasy teams has no real world impact. But I'm like, if I don't pick him, he's gonna have a great season. If I pick him, he's gonna get injured. I'm doomed either direction. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna pick him. I like him as a player. I find him exciting. I like watching him. I'm gonna pick him. Still won. So essentially that means that I drafted last in that league.
That's
And still won. So
crazy.
I did want to hang my hat on that I was able to recover. But I didn't have like the big name player, first round player, that all the other teams had. You
Yeah,
know,
that's crazy.
I'm not picking him next year. I agree with you. I've been burnt so many times with picking these guys who chronic injuries, and it's just, fool me once, shame on me, or shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah, I bet we could look at the data. I'll check Yahoo leagues like after, we could talk about it next week. But I bet the percentage of teams that won their league with Christian McCaffrey as their first pick, it has to be just
Yeah.
insanely low. Like you
Yeah.
have to be like in a very small percentage, which is just insane.
Yeah, and to be honest, like if I wasn't able to, like pick up Jaden Daniels and, very quickly again, you know, I feel like using SportWise gives me a bit of an edge, and no one else in my league is using SportWise. So those first few weeks where you're trying to identify who's playing well and who's rising and who's falling, I was able to see that faster in this particular league than some of the other folks because they're all just using kind of what's in Yahoo, or they're using preseason rankings, or they're using data from last year. Um, uh, so that was the only reason why. And like to be honest, I narrowly won. Like I should have lost. Like there's no reason why the Vikings shouldn't have Justin Jefferson playing for the whole game. Essentially to kind of against their number one rival with playoff implications. Like he should have played the whole game.
Yeah, and he like they missed him on like Sam Darnold missed him on like some easy like
Yeah,
touchdowns like when the game was still close in the first. It is
yeah,
crazy, but hey, I mean, it was a testament that you were even there with McCaffrey as your first pick, like even to make it to the championship is crazy.
yeah. It was a stressful season. I'll say with that week. Um, there's one other comment I was going to make, and I've lost it. That'll come back to me later. We'll talk about it another day. All right, let's quickly flip over to hockey. The last few minutes we have left, and we'll take a look at Josh's FSGA team. So just for those listening, this is our like expert league. We're a member of the Fantasy Sport and Gaming Association. And so we compete against the other companies that are in that are members of the association. And so in most cases, the competition is pretty good. Like you don't have any, you know, your brother-in-law who doesn't really watch football, who's, or hockey, who's, just joined because he thought it would be fun. There's no layups in this league. So it is uh, it's tough to win, uh, but I think we've had a dramatic improvement since the last time we were taking a look. So this is our team right now. Obviously, Connor McDavid um, is the obvious. I think we picked him first overall, or it would have been right up there with Nate McKinnon and Austin Matthews. Um, And then, one of the ones that I wanted to highlight for those hockey fans of those Marty Nichas. I could never pronounce it properly because he probably wasn't drafted. I don't think he was drafted, and he was picked up. And he's turning out to be one of the fantasy performers of the year. So, and the story behind him, for those that are listening at home, he had a contract renewal last summer. His dad got involved and was like talking to the media back in Europe. And it's never good when your dad gets involved in contract negotiations.
Right.
The Hurricanes, weathered the kind of storm and criticism, et cetera, held true, got their number because they're always financially responsible. And he has performed, which so many times when there's a big contract signing like that, the next year you see the player kind of tail off. It's been the exact opposite. He's turning into the number one center that, everyone thought he could be when he was drafted in the first round.
Interesting.
Um, so some other players, Fabian Zetterlund, plays in San Jose. A lot of young guys there. He's kind of dropping recently. He had a good start of the season, and then if you look at his kind of points per game, it started to kind of go the other direction. So he's a guy that to kind of keep an eye on. And then the last one is just the absolute dumpster fire that is the New York Rangers, which is a complete mystery to me because if you look at we'll just look at the Rangers team. This is one of the beauties of using SportWise. You can just kind of pull it all up. You look at their team, it's absolutely remarkable that they have all of these great players. How brutal they are. And they have like one of the best goalies, best young goalies in the league. It's strange.
Yeah,
This is
what
one of the
happened to them? I feel like, I follow hockey loosely. I don't know as much as you or Josh, but like when we get towards the end of the season, I do like to bet on hockey and I can analyze data, but I feel like a few years ago, like this is one of the Rangers were like a team I was betting on like a lot. Like what went wrong with this team?
to be honest, I don't know. Um, the if you look at the storyline, so they, pushed all in with their, this would have been 5 years ago, I think now. They wrote a letter to the fans saying, we're selling everything, we're botting him out, we're tanking, and then, we're going to be good again in 5 years. They were able to get Panarin, they traded for Trocheck, they robbed the Ottawa Senators, Zibanejad. They were able to get Trouba from the Winnipeg Jets. He's gone now. They've drafted okay. Like Lafreniere has turned out, Capo Caco has not. Keandre Miller is supposed to be good. He's been okay. Um, so they kind of accelerated the rebuild for all intents and purposes, and they were right back there. They got Shesterkin, obviously one of the best goalies in the world. So they're right back there, like within like 3 years, which is a remarkable turnaround. And the only way you can do that is if you're the New York Rangers, because people want to play in New York. They got Adam Fox for free from Carolina and Calgary. Um, like they were able to turn around really quickly. The only thing that I can think of that's going on there is that they've got a culture problem in the dressing room. They just traded Jacob Trouba, their captain, to the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. Your captain doesn't get traded.
That's interesting.
Very strange. And um, they've essentially said that Chris Kreider, one of their longtime Ranger veterans, Mika Zibanejad, all these guys are available and for sale right now, which seems like a harsh overreaction considering, yeah, they've been a dumpster fire this year. They weren't that bad. I think they were sitting in a playoff spot or just out of the playoff spot when Chris Drury started making all these kind of outward advances to other teams that these players were available. So that tells me that there's something going on in the dressing room, and it tells me that Peter Laviolette, who's their coach, they've backed him, so he's not going anywhere. Because they would have already fired him if, normally they pick the players over the coach. And so there's some dynamic. It's the same thing that's happening in Vancouver. The NHL is not normally known for being a soap opera, but you have Elias Pettersson, their, $10.5 million player, and JT Miller. For some reason, these two guys don't get along. And this is not the right position for him. Um, but Pedersen has, uh, had an okay year, but not a great year considering. And so it's obviously affecting their play on the ice. JT Miller had to have a personal leave of absence for a period of time. But like, I don't understand how you have these two guys who can't get along. So you
Does
get
that
two
happen
teams.
often in hockey, or is this is very rare?
I think
That
this is
say the
pretty
two
rare.
best players or whatever can't get along or whatever.
Like you've got two teams right now in the NHL that are having the exact same, I assume, problem in the dressing room. I don't think that's very common. This is new because hockey culture, I played hockey. You're all kind of raised kind of like the military to kind of march a certain way. And, good or bad, there's some instances where that's bad. And, there's been poor behavior from hockey players because it kind of follows this hockey culture mantra where there's not a lot of independence, very much a team oriented mentality. Um, so to have, guys not get along, it's not uncommon to like not like a guy, but you get along because it's all within the hockey culture. So to have it
Right.
at
That
this
was my
level,
question. Yeah.
Like the last time I remember this happening would have been Eric Carlson and Mike Hoffman in Ottawa, where the story, on Twitter is that their wives didn't get along.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I feel like in the NBA, right? Like, I'm not saying these guys are asking for trades, but like, it's very common in the NBA for star level players to change teams, ask for a trade. I don't like it here, whatever. Even in the NFL, not to the extent of the NBA, but it's become, I would say, more common than 10 years ago. But I didn't really remember ever hearing of stuff like that happening in like hockey.
It's like a new phenomenon. And I don't know if it's, the numbers getting bigger, the star power is getting bigger, and egos are getting bigger. Like you've got a Swedish player and you've got a kind of hard-nosed American who's been kind of known to be a bit of a tough guy to play against, probably a tough guy to get along with in the dressing room as well. And so, you know, why they don't get along, I have no idea. Um, but that could be the reason, and we might see more of it in hockey. It might be more like, Tyreek Hill coming out and saying, "Hey, like I'm out of here. I just got here,
Yeah,
but
that was
yeah, I'm out of
wild.
here." Like, what are you talking about? You didn't have a good season.
Yeah.
You can't blame everyone else. So we'll see, but it's definitely, it's one of those things that you have a cancer in the dressing room, the a coach or the chemistry between the players, the sum of the parts can be greater than the individual pieces. Or you have a cancer in the dressing room, you have a toxic relationship. It can just erode everyone else, particularly in hockey, because it's such a tight-knit group, and you need all four lines, all six defensemen, two goalies to be playing well to be able to win. Like there's very rare instances where you can have your superstars just win you the game. The Edmonton Oilers were able to do it last year with Connor McDavid and Draisaitl. I don't know if I have time on ice on here. I do. I'll pull this up. Last year, Draisaitl and remove defenseman. Draisaitl and McDavid were playing like 28 minutes game. So they're playing half of the game. That is bananas in hockey. So like have to go out there and
Yeah.
fly around as hard as you can for 45 seconds, getting hit, getting
Especially when you
slashed,
get to the
getting
play,
whacked.
the playoffs and stuff, right?
It's
That's
it's
like has to be even in heightened, just because of the everything.
it's crazy. And even Nate McKinnon last year, he was playing around the same amount. And you'll notice this year, all those teams have reduced the time on ice. Like they identified it as a problem. Like McDavid and where is Draisaitl even on this? Where's Edmonton? He's on here somewhere. But there he is. Um, so he's not that far off. So they're playing about the same because they're both 21 minutes a game. But it's pretty remarkable last year how they were able to actually kind of run that model of, we're going to win games just with our star players. Both those teams did win the Stanley Cup. Colorado kind of flamed out at the end. I'm assuming that they were just didn't have enough depth, and Nate McKinnon was probably tired. Uh, so you're seeing you need a team effort in hockey. So if you've got one cancer, even if it's among the star players, and it affects the feeling amongst everybody else, you just can't win. You can't overcome it. There's very few teams if they don't have that nice cohesive feeling. And for those that kind of followed the Florida Panthers last year, you saw the parties afterwards where they stayed up all night, went to the diner on the beach, and they went swimming with the Stanley Cup. And you look at all, they had 10, 12, 14 of the guys there. Like that's a tight-knit group. That's what
Hmm.
you want in hockey.
Yeah.
The guys who weren't there probably have families and couldn't stay out till 5 in the morning partying.
Yeah.
So Yeah, it is interesting. I would not be betting on any of those teams until they fix some of those internal issues. But back to the rolling insights, and so we'll get it back to the fantasy points per game. We've got two of those players, bottom of the lineup, probably okay to keep them. We got Brock Besser, Canuck. Probably okay to keep him. Like I think Besser's kind of a little bit isolated from some of those issues, and even if he's down a little bit, he's still a good kind of bottom rung player. If we compare to other players that are available in the league, there are a few guys that we probably could consider picking up. Um, one of the other things I like to do with this is I like to remove any of the really low samples. So like Declan Carlisle, he's played one game. His points per game is obviously he had a good game in that one game. You got Nikita Chibarov from the Jets. He looked really good, and I think he is going to be good. But he only played 4 games and he got hurt. So I like
Yeah.
putting a minimum to see the guys who played, as opposed to the guys who had. So there are some potential good pickups. I do like Kiefer Sherwood in Vancouver because he gets a ton of hits. And I find that players that do the non-point producing type things, but still like not goals, assists, points, but generate points in a league, they're great guys to pick up because most other folks who aren't looking seriously at the data consider those guys. Or they'll see a guy like Kiefer Sherwood at the top of whatever list they're looking at, and they're like, oh, who's Kiefer Sherwood? So anybody at home who's playing hockey, I think that Sherwood is a pretty good pick. And I think he's played 38 games this year. He's got a few points. He's going to keep hitting. Those guys don't stop hitting. He might stop scoring, but you're not really dependent on that. But he'll keep hitting. He's going to keep hitting. He's going to keep, he doesn't have that many
Mhm.
blocks. He's going to keep shooting the puck. Probably has a bunch of penalties. He's a good, solid, consistent pick. So we'll have to make some of these recommendations to Josh if he's not watching.
Yeah. He's made improvements though on the team from the last time. Maybe we just need to light a fire under him.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and everyone's got kind of their own views and philosophies and how they run teams. This is one model um, that obviously I built. Um, I haven't looked at our record in a little while, but I think we are rising, which is good. All
Definitely.
righty. Any hockey questions for me?
Well, okay. So what? Real quick before we get off, I'll pull up the Stanley Cup odds.
Yep.
You can give me just let me see here.
We'll pull up the teams.
Yeah. All right. So the favorite is still Edmonton at 7-1, and then you have Carolina at 7.5-1, Florida at 8-1, and then you get New Jersey and Dallas both at 10-1, Colorado 12-1, Vegas and Toronto 13-1. So that's kind of like the top six or seven. Is there anyone
Yeah,
that isn't in there that you think should be, or like who would your pick be? It sounds to me like you would not be picking like Edmonton right now.
but like I think it'll be interesting because Edmonton has taken a very different approach from what they had last year. They got rid of all their young guys, whether they chose to leave or not. And they brought in a bunch of old guys. And I heard, on the radio the other day, they were talking about Jeff Skinner, the, you know, journeyman third line. Like no one's ever called Jeff Skinner a journeyman, like grinder.
Hmm.
Um, so they've gotten a lot older and they've got a lot more, I would say, kind of trusted depth versus the young guys. Although I'm a huge believer that if you're going to win the Stanley Cup, you need young legs, you need energy. And, a 30-year-old versus a 22-year-old is quite a bit of difference in terms of spring in the step.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to struggle. And if you look at this list, they have three guys amongst those teams in the top scoring. You look at the Devils, they've got three guys, four guys.
Are the Devils like a Cleveland team though? Like they'll just never win.
They won a lot before. They won a lot in the 90s, in the early 2000s. I can't remember. They were a winning organization. Gretzky called them a Mickey Mouse organization, and then they went on to Scott Stevens and Martin Brodeur and won a lot.
What?
And
Yeah.
they
Okay.
they
So what changed then? What? Because they haven't been good in a long time, correct? Not good, but like they haven't won in a long time.
they haven't won in a long time. It's hard to win like in all leagues, but what two things changed? One is they ran something called the left winger lock system, which is essentially trap and hook and hold. So the NHL changed the rules after the last lockout, so you can't do that anymore because it was bad for hockey. It was pretty boring. And then the other thing is they went through a bit of a prolonged rebuild, but then they got Jack Hughes and he turned out. So they actually have quite a bit of talent. So it maybe took them a little bit longer to get back there. They did have the Kovalchuk versus LA Kings year where they went to the finals and didn't win. Um, but they made some mistakes. Like I think they got penalized for the Kovalchuk signing because it was an illegal contract and they lost two first round picks. And then the NHL came back and gave them one back. And so they've made a few mistakes, but they're back and they have a winning organization. Like they'll be fine. Lou Lamoriello left and he's in on the island now. But they've got a winning organization. I think that they'll be fine. Um,
Okay.
you look at
So
Florida.
they're not on the Leafs level of like they did the Leafs haven't won since like the 60s, right? Like they're
No,
not they're
no,
not that cursed.
I would consider New Jersey Devils a winning franchise in the NHL. They've won a bunch.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Florida, I mean, again, from eye test of just me watching hockey, like they looked just so good, in the playoffs the last few years.
Yeah, and they've got five guys on top of this list. So the two teams that are interesting are Carolina. They've got a few guys on this list. And I really like Carolina, as I mentioned previously, because I think they're just well constructed. They've got a great coach. They got the Andy Reid version in Rod Brindamore. So I think that eventually they have to be healthy and be able to figure it out and win the playoffs because they've just continued to kind of run out of gas, but they've got more depth now. The flip side is you've got Dallas. I think Dallas is an absolutely fantastic team, and you don't see any of these guys on the
Hmm.
list. That tells you something that they're winning with not one player who's kind of standing out and taking the offensive load.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So I would probably say Carolina, Florida, Dallas are probably my favorites, but we'll see. Edmonton, you get like the two best players in the world. Like
Yeah, it's hard
they
to. It's very much like Patrick Mahomes. Like the Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes. Sometimes that just matters more than anything else.
exactly like when you need someone to score a goal, the guy can just skate down the ice and score a goal. So yeah, that's hockey. We'll obviously, keep focused on football. We'll talk more and more hockey and baseball in the coming podcasts. All righty.
Yeah,
Well, it's been a pleasure, man, as always. Love chatting with you.
yeah, it was a
And
good
to those
episode, I think.
listen, yeah, those listening at home, we'll see you next week. Hey Ben, how's it going? I'm just looking now. I gotta get this other button done up.
Yeah,
Don't
get
look
that.
like my
Yeah,
formal self.
the people of YouTube, they